proposed operating budget, community budget work session. We held one Tuesday afternoon at noon. I would say it was relatively successful. I thought it went well. Obviously, we would love to be back to normal where we could do in-person meetings like we've done in years past prior to the pandemic. And I think this time next year, I believe we'll be doing this in that setting. But under the current climate and circumstances that we're under, we're working through this virtual setting. So appreciate the patience of everyone and the understanding as we go through this. Tonight, I wanted to go ahead and just set it off with the agenda of what the events are of this evening. First of all, there'll be an introduction and an executive summary by Mr. Kenneth Miller, our interim city manager, followed by the budget explanation of myself, the Robert Floyd, the director of budget and procurement. One thing of note, there'll be a question and answer session upon the completion of the presentation. We'd highly recommend, though, as we go throughout this presentation, if there are questions that come to mind from the participants in this call, please send a chat to the host, which is the city of Petersburg. And then what we'll do is we'll funnel those questions to Mr. Randall Williams and Ms. Logan Tollison. We'll answer them, copy and paste the question and the answer into the group chat for everyone to look at. So that way you don't have to wait. If you have a question the first 5-10 minutes of the presentation, you don't have to wait and try to remember the question throughout the entirety of the evening. So and then once we're done with the presentation, we'll go through that Q&A session, and we'll start with the questions that for some reason may not have gotten answered from the chat, and then we'll open it up to the public for their questions. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Kenneth Miller, our interim city manager.
Mr. Floyd, thanks a lot. Can I ask you to give me the next slide, please, sir? Thank you. So I'm trying to make this a little bigger myself. When I came back to the city, and some of you may or may not know, I was retired. I came back to the city, came back to help. Mr. Floyd, I got to give great thanks to Mr. Floyd, Mr. Williams, Logan, to all the city staff that really worked on this together and helped out and really rogered up when it was time. But when I came here, we had a gap of about $3.4 million. So our task in a very short time was to get the budget down from that $3.4 million overage to a balanced budget. And I got to thank Robert Floyd. Robert had more hair when we started this process. You can probably see now he's a little shiny on top. That's what happened. When we wanted to present a balanced budget, I think it's important. And we base this off of projections that we think the city may be in. It leaves room for, we were very conservative, it leaves room for down the road amendments, adjustments, should that take place. But I wanted to make sure that the new city manager, whoever he or she may be, when they came here, they had a balanced budget to operate and to work with, and they were not in a deficit or in a hole. Robert, next slide, please, sir. So here's some things that you will see and what you maybe won't see in the budget. When I first came, I had some opportunities to chat with some of our community partners, and we had employees that were making $7.25 an hour, and some employees here for years and making about $10, $11 an hour. So our goal was before the governor or before the mayor, not mayor, but the governor or the president or any of those folks said increase. We built in, we painstakingly did this. We built in that anybody that was making less than, or was making $7.25 an hour, he or she, come budget time, July 1, would go up to $11 an hour. Anybody making less than $15 an hour would go up to $15 an hour. My dream, my passion, my goal is next fiscal year that the minimum wage for a city employee in the city of Petersburg, full-time or part-time, would be at $15 an hour. Are we going to put a halt on poverty with that? No, but we're going to impact people's lives. You won't see where there's big budgets for folks at the top in funding in this budget. So you'll see a change in our organizational chart, which we'll show you shortly. You'll see we've budgeted $750,000 to be applied to the new courthouse building. Futuristic. And that's really important for us. Mr. Floyd's going to talk about how we realigned positions and still made it work. Each department consists of goals and objectives, and they're captured in this budget. Also, there's funding for $10 million for our schools. We also adhere to our city financial policy of budgeting, setting aside $500,000 for both our fund balance and $500,000 towards our capital improvement projects. So I think this budget is a little different. And on the current slide, what you see here is how we look at right now. We look at and it's a little different how, in my view, and I'll explain that in a second, but we have the residents of the city of Petersburg, our elected officials, and the city manager, me as the interim, our city auditor, Mr. Williams, and then Mrs. Jackson, our city clerk. And then you've got 2 deputy city managers and some other folks. Mr. Floyd, if you would please, next slide. Our proposal is that we do away with some of this stuff. So we've reduced some salaries as well. We have gotten rid of one deputy city manager, and the other one, we've reduced that salary down to $141,000 from the $155,000 that it stands at right now. And we try to get all of our financial pieces together. And so we wanted to put back in the CFO position that was here back in 2017 when we all first got here. The budget, it's a lean budget, it's an efficient budget, it's an effective budget. I created some years ago a management/leadership, either way, formula, O times A plus E equals E, and this budget fits it perfectly. Oversight, times accountability, holding ourselves accountable first, plus efficiency, trimming the fat, getting rid of what we don't need, makes us effective if we want to be effective. And we live by that creed, or that formula, if you will. It's worked well for me throughout my my leadership slash management career. I think it works well for this budget. Were some other positions reduced, or do we have some reduction in force? Yes, and this budget and this new org chart speak to that. So I think it's important that we get this message across to you. We've heard you. We've heard from a number of our community partners. We've got too much money at the top. This budget has more positions at the line level, the worker level, which I think sets us up for success as we move down the road. Mr. Floyd, if you would, please.
Okay, I wanted to start with the most foundational piece of information that we have as the city of Petersburg is going back to our strategic plan. It was recently adopted by council in December of 2020. 4 major goals or strategic goals are economic development, neighborhood vitality, good governance, and celebrate Petersburg. The reason why I highlighted that in a budget presentation is because one of the things on top of the many things that Mr. Miller spoke about in his introduction was from a budget standpoint, our office wanted to ensure with the guidance of Mr. Miller and council that programmatically, budgetarily, and strategically, everything needs to align either directly or indirectly with the strategic plan. So what exactly does that mean? Mr. Miller opened up that first slide with that $3.4 million gap. So essentially we had to work our way down from that $3.4 million gap to a balanced budget. The most simplistic way to start that process is programmatically and budgetarily from a department standpoint, what is being proposed in this from a department level in the budget that does not align directly or indirectly with the strategic plan. And as you go back through that slide, and we'll post this on the website upon completion of this meeting, it'll be posted tomorrow. You'll be able to go back and look and then think about this slide as it relates to aligning with the strategic plan, so you can see how that in the background behind those numbers know that there were decisions being made that essentially, if the departments weren't able to justify well why their funding requests were aligned with the strategic plan, then quite frankly they weren't able to include that in this proposed budget. And I always wanted to start with the strategic plan, because I think that's the core foundation of what we do as a city and budgetarily as well. So I think that's extremely important. So some of the key considerations for the fiscal year 21-22, obviously we'll have external and internal key considerations. From an external and an internal standpoint is the global pandemic. What does the global pandemic have from an external standpoint? How does it impact the community as a whole, the state, the country overall. So, you know, we have business closures and we also have business reopenings. You know, economically, we took a big hit for the first few months of the pandemic in 2020. And then as you can see via the budget amendment we did throughout this current fiscal year, as well as the proposed budget, we'll see the numbers starting to climb a little bit to where closer to where they were prior to the pandemic. But then from an internal standpoint, what is the impacts on the citizenry and the staff as a whole? So that's something that the administration and the elected officials and the like need to be cognizant of as we move forward, not just from a budgeting standpoint, but from an operating standpoint as well. So I think that's extremely crucial. And I'm going to kind of go back and forth, but and you can see all of those on the screen. So we have obviously our intergovernmental expenses. So we need to make sure that we are budgeting accordingly for those. Those are essentially our fixed costs, so like our Riverside Regional Jail, Crater Juvenile Detention, ARWA, South Central Wastewater Authority, and the like, and things of that nature are ones that we have to account for those fundings up front before we even worry and even address the actual operational impacts of the departments themselves. But I also wanted to add the courts building to that as well. And remember, Mr. Miller said it was $750,000. I want folks to remember that number when I get to a later slide when we're talking about personnel. That $750,000 that's for the first time this upcoming fiscal year, it's getting budgeted. And that's above and beyond operational funds. That's money that we are not able to touch from an operational standpoint. Unfunded mandates. There's quite a few unfunded mandates across the arena that we're dealing with. One of the big ones that we focused on here, and you can see it within the budget document, is that in our registrar's office. There were a lot of mandates that came down from the state as it relates to the election and the election process and the hours of operations and the things that they need to do as an organization and an agency to meet the needs of the voting populace. So major ones from an internal standpoint is managing our healthcare costs. As we know, the healthcare costs have been rising for years and years and years collectively. Thankfully, the last 2 fiscal years, the current one we're in now, we received about a 10% decrease in our rates. This upcoming budget accounts for about a 2.8% decrease. One thing that Mr. Miller and our team has been working on, as well as working with HR, is during this upcoming fiscal year, we're going to solicit those services out again and see what those rates will look like out on an open market. And ideally, we'll be able to reduce those costs even more in the future. Another big key internal consideration is new administration. As we know, our previous city manager left in February. Ears deep into the budget process, Mr. Miller came on board, I believe, that following Monday. And as you saw when we talked about the timeline, we hit the ground running, so to speak, without a parachute. He was just running day one. And there's a good possibility that from start to completion of this budget process, we could very well have three city managers sitting in that seat during that time. So it's been a tumultuous, stressful time putting this budget together. Although it's been fun, it's been tough, and that's an internal consideration that needs to be considered as we move forward, and we've considered it up to this point. And then the biggest one of all of these is the returning to normal operations and programming. As we know, the pandemic had a drastic impact on a lot of the operations within the city. There was a lot of functions that were not currently being operated due to the pandemic. So we know that we are slowly but surely coming out of that. And we know that there's a lot of eased regulations from the state as well as the federal government. And we know that from a local standpoint and an operational standpoint, we'll be easing back into normal operations as well. So we need to be cognizant of what that looks like. You don't go full board day one, because realistically, full board day one would have started months ago. It wouldn't have started July 1. So a lot of the funding that you see in a lot of these programs actually starts at the end of the previous fiscal year, and they ramp up for it at the tail end of this fiscal year as they prep for July 1 to go live on a lot of these programs. But since a lot of those programs have been shut down, a lot of the ramp up has not been able to get done. But what we've done is been able to work with Ms. Yerby and Mr. Crocker and several other of our agencies that have a lot of the programs with the community, youth, the elderly, and things like that, to ensure that we slowly but surely meet those needs, but also meet it in a way that we can actually budgetarily afford it and programmatically actually utilize the funds that are there that gets the most impact on the community. From a City of Petersburg's operating fund structure, obviously we talk primarily about the general fund, and that's one of the big ones that we do discuss, because it is the largest fund that we have, and it funds the vast majority of operations of the city. But we also have our special revenue funds, which consists of our grants, streets, CDBG, and stormwater funds. And then our enterprise funds, which is our utilities fund, golf course, and mass transit. And then this next slide will show you our budget summary for this upcoming fiscal year, as well as some previous years past information to put it in perspective. Key note here is the comparison, the percent change is based off of the upcoming budget compared to the amendment. And obviously there's a 9.86% decrease from this current amended budget we have. But before folks freak out, we have to be aware of the fact that a lot of that money that we're looking at in the amendment was a lot of the state and federal funding that was provided to address the pandemic via CARES and things of that nature, as well as our streets fund with some of the money that we were owed from previous years due to our set aside program. All of those funds kind of hit the budget in fiscal year 21, which resulted in the about $10.6 million increase from what was adopted to what's essentially been amended. But that's not one of those situations where that magnitude of spending and revenue is actually sustainable. It's a lot of one-time revenue that results in a lot of one-time costs. So I was wanting people to be cognizant of that. So essentially, the budget's actually overall going down from what was adopted this current fiscal year to what's being proposed. And you can see, again, we'll post this on the website, and I encourage everyone, a lot of these slides that you'll see, if not all of them past this one right here, will reference pages within the budget document that's on the city's website. So please take a look at that budget, take a deep dive, look at it, analyze it. And any questions you would have as a result of that, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. We have no issue whatsoever in resolving and answering any of those questions that any of the potential folks might have. So this next slide, remember how I told everyone to remember the $750,000? That's going to come up key as it relates to this particular slide here. And Mr. Miller spoke about this quickly, but also is very, in my opinion, very impactful what he stated as it relates to the organizational shift that's being proposed in this budget. As you can see, 624 current full-time positions budgeted and 77 part-time. In this proposed budget, 645 full-time and 83 part-time. And then let's go back, and I think it's important to go back. So let's look here at the $74.5 million amended budget that we have there from a general fund standpoint. This upcoming budget is 74.7. Remember the $750,000 number I spoke about, that actually drops the number down to 73 million or 74 million, a little less, 73.9 and some change. So we realistically increased the staffing levels, but decreased our overall budget. And I think that's kudos to Mr. Miller and his vision, as well as council support, as well as the staff that was involved in getting this done. So pages 25 through 38 is a detailed explanation of the positional changes that have occurred throughout the overall budget. And I kind of highlighted there on the right hand of the slide the variances of each department that had ups and downs. So I know the major questions usually ask is 21 new employees, which departments account for those 21 employees? As you can see, it's multiple departments, some go up, some go down. And then on pages 25 and 26 of the budget document, we even included the shift when we talked about the realignment of the positions. There were some departments that stayed neutral, but there were some changes done personnel wise within their budget. So we wanted to ensure that all of the personnel changes were accounted for from a transparency standpoint to ensure that everyone was aware of what was happening. And one of the major things that you'll see within the budget, you'll see some departments go up, but it's no fault of their own because of previous fiscal years, including the current one we're in now. You'll have positions that are housed within a department but funded elsewhere. So Mr. Miller was like that. We're no longer doing that. If your position is in budget and procurement, then your position is getting charged to budget and procurement. So wherever your funding source was before, there's relief there, and the money hits the general fund because that's where we're housed at. And that's across the board in all of the departments. The only variances we have to that is within our public utilities, and that's one major department that actually has several different divisions within, and a lot of there's personnel that are split across those. Another key thing that I want to say before, I don't want to harp on it too much, but I think it's important while we're here, is to talk about not just the top level of the executive part of the organizational chart that has done away with the layers of oversight and put more doers in the budget. But from a departmental standpoint, aside from our major departments like our public works and a lot of our public safety departments, the departments such as mine and all the other ones that are smaller, more support level, we no longer will be funding assistant or deputy directors. We're actually reallocating those funds to provide funding for individuals that will actually be productive within the department producing work, so to speak. So this next slide, I want to kind of lay the groundwork for our operating revenue. I'm going to first touch on the revenue, and then I'll go programmatically via cluster the way I've done. I believe I did this style of a presentation, I believe 2 or 3 years ago in our budget ward meetings when we did those back then. So this is the same way. We're going to talk about the revenue across the board, both in the general fund, the special revenue, and enterprise, and then we'll go into the programmatic expenditures. So from a general fund revenue standpoint, I've talked about it briefly about the fluctuation that we had in the increase. I want folks to pay close attention to the chart at the bottom. If you see the revenue from 17-18, then up to 18-19, when it was really high, then 19-20, the onset of the pandemic, we had a drastic decrease in our revenue to the tune of about almost $4 million. That was about 3.7, but nevertheless, $4 million decrease in revenue in 19-20. And then as we rolled into 2021 and that a proposed budget, we were able to increase a little bit based on the revenue that we were seeing. And then 2021 amendment, we were able to increase it even more because from an economic standpoint, the city of Petersburg, actually, we took a big hit in the first few months of the pandemic. It was really essentially March and April. But towards the tail end of May and definitely in June, our revenues from our local sales, meals, lodging tax, things of that nature, they were actually rebounding strongly, stronger than we had anticipated. And so as we move forward into this year, those numbers continued to climb. So we're able to do the amendment. And then you see obviously a slight increase this year or this upcoming fiscal year because of that increase. Now, what that does is we were very conservative within those revenue numbers, and Ms. Miller talked about it. By being conservative, that gives us an opportunity to track and monitor these revenues on a monthly basis. And then by December, January timeframe, if we're trending the way we think we might be trending, then it'll open up an opportunity for some sort of amendment to address some of the needs that maybe weren't addressed in the originally adopted budget. So that's one thing that we're mindful of and we're cognizant of. I would rather budget a little bit lower up front than budgeting a little bit higher than we're supposed to, if that makes sense. I'd rather adjust up than have to adjust down and lead to further reductions halfway through the year. So that's where that conservative come in play. But again, keep in mind the line graph there. For when I get to the expenditures, I'll explain why I think what some of the budgetary policies and procedures we put in place over the last 4 years has definitely yielded fruit for us, because the revenue is very volatile. You see it was really high and then it dropped really low. And when I go to a further slide, you'll see what I mean about the flexibility and the stringent budget spending controls that we've implemented. Next section is our special revenue funds, grants, streets, CDBG, and stormwater. Grants fund is about $938,000 that we're budgeting for next fiscal year. And this can be found on page 56 of the budget document. This is something I didn't do at the last presentation, but I wanted to ensure that each of the slides has a page number for reference so that the community, if they're looking at the budget while we're going through the presentation, or if the council members are on board or staff are on board watching this, they can flip through the budget document and see what we're talking about as we go through. So as we all know, that the $6.3 million for this current fiscal year, the vast majority of that funding is our CARES funding. So obviously that money is going to be expended by the end of this fiscal year. If not all of it, the vast majority of it will be expended. We don't know what that leftover amount will be, and we don't know what upcoming grants we will receive until we actually receive the award letter. So we only budget for those few grants that we know for a fact we're going to get, like our victim witness, our community corrections, our MOU cap-up grant that Ms. Tammy Yerby used for a lot of her summer employment of the $75,000 that you'll see later on in one of the slides. So those are the only 3 grants that we do budget for up front. Any other grants that we do receive and any carryover money from grants that are currently taking place this current fiscal year will be will be appropriated via supplemental appropriation in council once we close the books for 21 and we have a firm grasp of what those numbers are. Rather than guesstimating, we want to get it right. We want to get it precise and exact so that we ensure we're spending the right amount of money based on the revenue that we're receiving. Next one is going to be our streets fund. That can be found on page 58. Really, that one's a decrease from the amended budget, but relatively flat from other previous years. The 8.5 for this current fiscal year, that $2.6 million was that set aside funding that VDOT actually paid back to the city. That was when we were on the set aside program due to some financial issues and from previous years prior to our arrival. They put us on a set aside program where they essentially withheld a lot of our revenues, and they did a true up at the end of that process. And this current fiscal year and this year was the first year we were able to actually receive the revenue on a quarterly basis, as opposed to being on the set aside. But in addition to the 5.9 million we're getting, we received about $2.6 million that we were able to appropriate and then fund a lot of the projects. Prime example, the St. Andrew Street Bridge was funded via these set aside funds. So we're glad that it was able to work out, and that true up actually resulted in revenue in our favor as opposed to something lower or potentially having to pay them back. So we're able to fund some of the capital projects that the community desperately needed. CDBG fund found on page 58, as well as the streets fund. We're only budgeting the $632,000. That is for the programmatic money that is being allocated to the city of Petersburg for next fiscal year. We know that of that $1.5 million in this current fiscal year, some of that money, or a lot of that money, we don't know what that number is yet, will carry forward into next year. But rather than try to guesstimate what that is, again, we will do a supplemental appropriation when the current fiscal year ends, so that way we have a firm grasp of what that number is, rather than having to go and reduce if that's the case. And currently, as you look on page 58, and I believe the expenditures are on 59 of the budget document, that $632,000 is sitting in an unallocated line. That's because they programmatically have not taken that to city council. I believe that's taken place in June. So Mr. Tabor and the folks in the planning and CDBG office will be taking those program requests to city council for approval. But until then, it'll be approved at the 632 unallocated. And as council approves it, we will amend the document itself. Don't need to do necessarily a budget amendment. It's just a reallocation of the funds that are already going to be approved. So I just want to be mindful of that. So I know that's coming in June. Next one is going to be our stormwater fund. That's going to be found, the revenue page will be found on page 60. I think I might have glossed over the internal considerations on one of the other earlier slides, but the collection rates was one that was an internal consideration. And stormwater is the first time of the slides. You'll see more later that collection rates comes into play as it relates to what we're budgeting. As you can see, we're budgeting 1.4 this year. Currently, based on the collection rates that we're receiving and the money and the revenue that's coming in due to the pandemic and a little slowdown in some of the collections that we receive, we've had to subsequently reduce the revenue as well as the operating expenses for the stormwater operations. And as I go forward, the next few slides, you will see the next one is going to be our enterprise, golf course, transit, and utilities. Golf course, we're going to go to one. It's essentially staying level funding. One thing that we've done differently this year, and that can be found on page 63, is when we're doing the presentation, normally what we've done in the past is do local, state, and federal numbers for each fund. And then, you folks have to go look at the budget document to see what the numbers are. But for the golf course, as well as the utilities fund in 2 slides, we wanted to break down and show a detailed look at what the revenues look like. And as you can see, our green fees numbers and our cart rental numbers are going up. I can proudly say that Mr. Fagan over at the golf course has definitely kept our office, as well as Mr. Miller's office, into the loop as it relates to the revenue and the business being done at the golf course. And we're actually getting better business than we have. I believe he said April was one of the highest grossing, if not the highest grossing month that the Dogwood Trace has had in its history. So that, though the pandemic was extremely bad for a lot of folks and economically and things of that nature, due to the outdoor nature of the golf course, that business picked up because, like I said the other day, I'm a golfer, and when I hit the ball, and anyone in my group knows my ball's not going to be anywhere near them. I'm going to be in the trees looking for it. So social distancing is not an issue on the golf course. It's really just trying to find the ball in the bushes. But nevertheless, I wanted to make a joke about that because, it really does show that folks kind of took up interest when that was the only thing that was open about this time last year. So the business is ramped up and the revenues are coming in much better than expected. Transit fund, pages 64 through 66. I did keep this one broken down, local, state, and federal. And if you look at those pages 64 through 66, you'll see why, because that would turn into like 3 or 4 full slides. But I wanted to highlight those 3 pages because I think it's important to see the breakdown of their revenue streams, as well as a lot of their explanation from their capital on how their capital money it makes up their and how percentage wise the local, state, and federal share makes up their. Sorry, I got muted. I'll back up. But pages 64 through 66 is really important to me because the folks over in transit worked with our department. I give a lot of credit to Ms. Logan, our budget analyst in this department. She was able to transform a lot of the desires and wishes we had from a budget presentation standpoint. And she was really able to be creative with the way we're transparent with a lot of the information and showing a lot of things that we haven't shown in the past, including for transit, a lot of their capital projects in detail, as well as breaking down, for a bus, it costs $100 and something thousand of that. This amount's paid for locally. This is by state money and this is federal money. And I thought that was really interesting. So again, pages 64 through 66 of the budget document is a really good read, in my opinion. And I would encourage everyone to look at it. So the next slide is going to be our utilities fund revenue found on page 62 of the budget document. Back to our collection rates. You can see our $15.1 million we're budgeting this current fiscal year due to the revenue coming in a little bit lower than we had anticipated. And you'll see and hear more of this moving forward in the next month or so as it relates to some of the presentations that are going to be coming to council. But our revenues have not been coming in the way we anticipated, so we're having to reduce those revenue streams accordingly. Obviously, as with the general fund, we will be tracking those and monitoring those on a monthly basis. And Ms. Ennis and her team will definitely be helping us and be our allies in that. And if we see an uptick in revenue, then we have no issue bringing forth an amendment to increase their budget accordingly. So now I will go into the programmatic operating expenditures for the proposed fiscal year 21-22 operating budget. This is the slide that I showed on one of our previous presentations that now has been fixed. That 20 cents is really 21 cents. It was a rounding issue. There is no money going away. That was always just a rounding issue with anything. If you round, sometimes the number goes up, and when you add up those rounded numbers together, you don't always get your dollar. But it is $1. I promise you that. There is no shenanigans there. So this is for general fund revenue, by the way. And on average, 23 cents for every dollar of your revenue goes to public safety, 20 cents to social services, 13 cents to the schools, 10 to general government, 7 for our constitutional folks, and 6 for our public works. And then that big category, and the reason why it's a big category is so our dollar can look good and fit in our budget document. So thank you, Logan, for making that work. Though it's a big category, collectively those add up to 21 cents, but they're all lower than the 6 cents of the public works. You have our courts and other public safeties, community affairs, development services, our transfers, our non-departmental, and our debt service. All of that makes up about 21 cents of the dollar, every dollar in the general fund. And speaking of the general fund on the expenditure side, remember when I told everyone to look back and remember that the curvature of the line graph for the revenue. And it was very, very sporadic, and it would go up and down and up and down. One thing that I can say is we've honestly implemented a lot of fiscal restraints and a lot of policies internally to curtail spending when spending needed to be curtailed. And you can see that as we've gone through, even through the pandemic, our spending has stayed relatively flat. Well, that is a good thing, because if the revenue is as volatile as it can be based on the economy and based on patterns of citizens and things like that, as it relates to a lot of our revenue streams, having a stable expenditure curve is very important. So I can honestly say I'm pleased that chart played out that way. As we're analyzing it, that's what we're seeing. We just weren't sure how it was going to show in a slide. But if you just look at them side by side, on the first slide with the revenue and then this one, you'll see that the revenue has been very sporadic, so to speak. There's a lot of ups and downs, but the expenditures have been relatively flat. And one thing I will say is relatively flat at a lower amount than what the revenues are. So that, keep in mind though, the numbers on the left show the amounts. So though the revenues are up and down, they were always up and down higher than what the expenditures were. And then obviously as we're the adopted, amended, and the proposed numbers, those will be balanced. So you can see those the categories here from a general fund standpoint, and they're also the categories that we utilize within the operating budget itself. And once we get through the grants and a few other slides, we'll go through our programmatic breakdown of all of those expenditures. But general fund going from 74.5 up to 74.7. And real quick, and I'm sorry I'm dragging on, but I wanted to highlight the big reason why this number increased. And it goes back to the $750,000. A lot of the money we had to budget, again, $500,000 for fund balance and $500,000 for our capital, which is our typical $1 million for fund balance. But we also are transferring $750,000 to our capital fund to fund the construction of a new courts building. So that $750,000 on top of the other $1 million is about $1.75 million that the city of Petersburg cannot use operationally. Throw in the $10 million for school, that's even more money that the city itself is not able to actually operate under. And I just wanted to make that key note. Next slide is our grants fund, page 57. I kind of already spoke about this. The 3 grants that we are budgeting for is our victim witness, which is level funding based on what we were provided from the Commonwealth. Community corrections is actually, I put a star here because during this current fiscal year, and we've already taken it to taken this to council to do the supplemental appropriations. Community corrections, they actually expanded some of their programming during this current fiscal year. The initial intent was to have it for the full fiscal year of 21, but due to the pandemic, they delayed it till about January. So the funding didn't come until January, and they did it in a way that it was actually a separate grant. But rolling into 21, 22, those 2 grants, the community corrections and the community corrections expansion, are actually being consolidated into one programmatic grant this upcoming fiscal year, and that amount is going to be $568,930. And then the last one is our MOU cap up $75,000, which is again totaling our $938,000 for our grants fund. And everything else moving forward outside of these last 2 slides will be broken down like this. So as you can see through our budget document, and it's broken down in clusters. Our first cluster is going to be our general government, and this can be found on pages 69 through 88 in the budget document. Again, I encourage everyone to take a look at it. The proposed amount is $7.16 million. This entire cluster is comprised of 47 full-time and 12 part-time employees. It accounts for about 9.6% of the general fund budget and represents about a 3.58% increase from fiscal year 21 amended budget. And the general government consists of city council, which is about 5% of the general government budget, city manager's office, which is about 10.4% of the general fund or general government's budget, city attorney 4.8, city assessor 7.8, human resources and risk management 24.4, finance and collections 14.8 and 9.2, budget and procurement is 8.8, and then information technology is 14.8. Again, I encourage everyone to look at not only the personnel breakdown at the beginning to kind of show the variances in what was done for the departments, because again, we had deputy city managers funded and housed in other departments, as well as within the budget and procurement office and several other departments. They were funded elsewhere. We consolidated them, put them into the home that they belong. So therefore their budget does increase, but the staffing levels may not. So I want to again make that a keynote. And then there was obviously several structural changes done within to create more levels of productivity as opposed to more levels of oversight. Next section is our constitutional officers. Proposed $5.005 million consists of our commissioner of revenue, city treasurer, clerk of circuit court, commonwealth attorney, sheriff's office, and our registrar. And yes, I'm aware the registrar is not technically a constitutional officer. That is where this budget has always been housed, and that's kind of where it's at. We know that that's more of an appointed position, but it fits perfectly in the constitutional spot for us for what we're trying to accomplish. And these can be found on pages 90 through 104. 60 full-time employees, 13 part-time employees, It's about a 6.25% increase from 2021 amended budget, and accounts for about 6.7% of the entire general fund. Biggest reason for the increases here is the Commonwealth approved approximately about a 5% pay increase for the constitutional folks. And then our registrar's office increase, not drastically, but I mean, programmatically drastically, she would say, and I would agree, due to a lot of the mandates that were provided or handed down on their office. And we were able to thankfully fund several new positions and for her office to ensure that she has the coverage that she needs during those peak election times and ensure that she's able to meet the needs of the voting populace. Next section, and I told myself I was going to fix this slide, but I didn't. So this is bright red. So everyone cover your eyes. It's really, really bright. The next section is going to be our public safety section. Total operating of 17, or total proposed operating of $17.9 million, comprised of 209 full-time and 16 part-time employees, found on pages 106 through 120 of the budget document. In this public safety cluster accounts for about 23.2 of the entire general fund budget. Police department makes up about 45.7% of this cluster. And again, I encourage everyone to look at that because it'll show you some of the new positions that were provided to the police department. Two of the most important ones that were added late as part of the process. Mr. Miller and Chief Christen were working together, and we're actually providing full funding for a social worker within the department. Chief Christen wanted to ensure that he had someone on staff that was able to meet some of the mental health needs and maybe some of those other soft needs that maybe some of the police officers weren't able to handle. And we know that there's a lot of issues going on nationwide, and social workers definitely could come in handy in the city of Petersburg and within their police department. And then the other one was their crime scene investigation part-time employee that they were able to fund. I think both of those positions will be very crucial for that department moving forward. And I think that, and I credit Travis, Chief Christen and Mr. Miller for actually working that in towards the tail end of this budget proposal cycle to ensure that need was met, rather than trying to wait halfway through and adjusting and making that adjustment at the end of or halfway through the fiscal year via an amendment. Next one is going to be emergency communications, about 10.1% of the public safety. Animal control 1.5%, fire is 38.2%. And again, I encourage everyone to look at those budgets as well. We were able to in this proposed budget kind of bring in a few, I believe it was 3 new firefighter positions, and then 2 or 3, I don't remember off the top of my head, upper level positions from the fire department to ensure they have someone that's able to handle their fleet and their maintenance and things like that, and their trainings, because that was one thing that's been lacking in the fire department. And Chief Leibold was able to articulate that to Mr. Miller and the budget team as we're going through, and that was one of those needs that definitely needed to be addressed in this budget. Community corrections is 3.2% of the budget. Again, right there, it shows that it's funded through the grants fund. So though that's $17.9 million, not all of that is within the general fund. And then VJCCCA is 1.2%. And overall, it's about a 0.92% increase from the amended budget of this current fiscal year. Next section, again, I apologize for the bright green, is our courts and other public safeties. Section is a proposed budget of about $576,000, found on pages 122 through 125. Comprised of 5 full-time and 1 part-time. Both of those are one of the full-time and part-time is housed in our circuit court judges and admin division, and then our victim witness makes up the other 4 full-time positions. All these other divisions, departments, however you like to call them, is a lot of our contractual obligations that we have on behalf of the courts, things like that. There's no bodies in there. It's just some of the programmatic funding that the city provides for those functions. And it represents about a 0.44% decrease from 2021 amended budget, and about 0.4% of the overall general fund budget. Next section, and this one's bright again, colors are rough. Proposed of $25.2 million, and only of this function within public works and utilities, only 2 of the divisions are actually within the general fund. That's facilities and grounds, as well as refuse. And that's really a contractual one-liner there for our refuse collection. Everything else from our stormwater, streets, water and wastewater are funded via the utilities fund. Stormwater is via the stormwater fund, and streets is from our streets fund. And this can be found on pages 127 through 146. And it accounts for, those two areas account for about 6.3% of the entire general fund budget. There's 114 full-time positions and 11 part-time positions. And it represents about a 15.5% or 5.6% decrease from 2021 amended budget. Most of that coming from our stormwater, streets, and utilities revenue going down, streets being the VDOT set aside funding that we received, stormwater, and then our utilities revenue is going down, and the expenditures likewise are going down due to the revenue that we're receiving and anticipating receiving not being as high as we would have liked. And next section is going to be our social services. Both of these are housed within the general fund. Total amount is about $14.6 million. They can be found on pages 148 through 154 of the budget document. It's comprised of 112 full-time positions and 2 part-time positions. 111 of the full-time and both part-time positions are actually in the Department of Social Services, and there's 1 full-time position within our CSA. It accounts for 19.6% of the entire general fund. 70.7% of this cluster comes from the Department of Social Services, and then the other 29.3% comes from CSA. And it's about a 1.32% decrease from fiscal year 20 to 21 amended budget. Catch my breath. Next section is going to be our leisure and community affairs. Proposed amount of $8.5 million. All of these budgets, this cluster can be found on pages 156 through 173 of the budget document. It accounts for about 2.3% of the general fund, and then the only 3 general fund funded departments are our recreation and community engagement, our library, and then our cemetery administration, which is just part-time staff that run that cemetery office, comprised of 73 full-time and 24 part-time employees. We also have our Dogwood Trace Golf Course, which is obviously funded via the Golf Course Fund, Transit, which is funded by our Transit Fund, and then our MOU Cap-Up is funded through the Grants Fund. Those 3 on the left-hand side are funded in alternative funding sources outside of the general fund. And it represents a 4.09% decrease from 2021 amended budget. Next section is going to be our development services. The total proposed of about $2.4 million. These budgets can be found on pages 175 through 184 of the budget document. Accounts for about 2.5% of the general fund, 25 full-time and 4 part-time employees, about a 29.25% decrease from 2021 amended budget. And before folks freak out, keep in mind that we have CDBG in this category as well. And we know that it was 1.5 million this current fiscal year, and we're budgeting 632 just for that flat amount that we know we're going to receive. And that's where the vast majority of that funding decrease comes from. We have planning, economic development, neighborhood services, our tourism, as well as our Freedom Support Center and CDBG within this cluster as well. This next slide is going to show some of the other general fund categories, and as well as the corresponding pages that they're on. Page 186 shows our debt service. And not only does it show our debt service, it actually shows our debt service for the next, I believe, 20 years at the bottom of that page on 186. So we were able to show a lot of the breakdown, not just the yearly budget amounts, but also in the future, so that folks can be aware of that. We decreased this, and it's being proposed at $3.1 million, decrease of about 11.46% from the current fiscal year, and it's about 4.2% of the entire general fund. Our schools transfer is on page 187, and it's level funding at the $10 million, about 13.4% of the general fund. Our fund transfers is $2.465 million, an increase by 100%. And that's because this current fiscal year we're in now, we do not have the $500,000 transfer to our CIP, and we do not have the $750,000 transfer to the CIP to cover the court the construction of the new courts. So those two additional transfers is the result of the increase. And that's about 3.3% of our general fund. Our non-departmental, which can be found on page 189 of the budget document, is about $6.4 million. It decreased by about 15.68%. And again, that's where we house our Riverside Regional Jail, our Crater Juvenile, a lot of our community partners that don't belong necessarily in departmental budgets. So we lump them into our non-departmental, so that way that those agencies that are responsible for it don't have to worry about finding the funding within their own operating budget. We isolated it on the side, so that way the city manager's office, finance, and the budget and procurement is aware of what of those non-departmental costs we have and know where they're at. So that's where we budget for our fund balance replenishment as well. So obviously we decreased that amount by $500,000, and then several other decreases in that area resulted in that 15.68% decrease. Next section is something that we have not done in the past, at least since I've been here, and this is proudly my fourth budget fourth full budget that I've had the pleasure of being able to be a part of and put together for Petersburg. Up until this point, we weren't in a position to be able to actually include a capital budget within the operating budget. But this year, with the credit to Mr. Randall Williams and Ms. Tangela Ennis over in the utility side that helped us a lot on this, we were able to capture a lot of the capital needs for this upcoming fiscal year and actually include it within this budget. Now, this is not the 5-year CIP. This is just a snapshot of fiscal year 21-22's capital budget. Basically, it's a lot of we have some operating costs. So some of this, like the first two, facilities and fire and EMS, that $360,000. Though it's in our CIP, it's in our capital budget, it's actually operating expenses within the operating budget that's actually paying for that. And when you go down below stormwater, same way, there's some operational expenses there. Streets, there's some operational expenses there. Water, wastewater, and once we get down there, that's when we talk about more of our bonds and some of those VRA bonds that we have. A lot of our funding sources that are external to the operating budget. We wanted to ensure that we captured that. Pages 191 through 196 will actually break them down by program and project. So this is just kind of a summary level of it, but pages 191 through 196 will show detail level for each of those projects moving forward. Just for 21-22, I want to keep saying that because in June, myself and Mr. Williams is going to be bringing to City Council a presentation as it relates to the CIP and the development and the approval process. We're going to bring, because currently we don't have an adopted established process flow for developing or approving the CIP. So we tried to work through this current fiscal year to get a CIP adopted by council, but without having a solidified process, we weren't able to gain a lot of traction, and therefore we weren't successful in doing that. But moving forward, once we go through in June and then we're going to first meeting in June, I believe is June 1st, and then we're going to do the presentation, provide recommendations, and have on the 15th meeting, we're going to have council vote and kind of put it in stone, the process for development and approval, so that as we migrate through fiscal year 21-22, this time next year, we'll be approving both the operating and capital budget like we are this year, but also approving the 5-year CIP. So that way all of that can be done congruently. And the last two projects that we have there is our unallocated $500,000. On that presentation on the 1st and then the subsequent meeting on the 15th, we're going to bring forth some of the candidates for spending of that $500,000 based on the capital needs that have been brought to our attention. And we'd ideally like council to kind of vote on what that funding will be spent on, so that way we can no longer call that unallocated. It'll be actually allocated to specific projects. And then obviously, once again, that $750,000 for our courts that is in there. Though the money will not be spent there, it's being accounted for there from a tracking standpoint and a consistency standpoint. Okay, that was a lot of information. So now I'm going to get to the budget calendar. And so where we are currently, and you see it's May 13th today. This is our second community budget work session. We've done everything through March. We've done that. We presented the budget to council. April, we did a formal presentation. Then we sent a revised budget, posted it on the website, sent it to council on April 29th. We scheduled the public hearing for the budget on May 3rd. We discussed our financial policies, which we're going to bring back in July. Tuesday afternoon and this evening, we're having our community budget work sessions. May 18th, we're having our public hearing, which is also our second reading of the ordinance for the budget. And then May 25th, we're also going to have a special called council meeting to have council approve or adopt the fiscal year 21-22 budget. And then you move into June. I briefly talked about this. We're going to do the presentation of the CIP process recommendations. And then on the 15th, ideally, city council would vote to approve that process. And then July 1st begins the new fiscal year. So I'm almost done. I just wanted to, I know we started with this slide. It's a different variation of the slide, but I wanted to reinforce some of the key budget highlights that Mr. Miller brought up in his portion of the presentation. This proposed operating budget is recommending that all non-seasonal employees be brought up to $15 an hour by the fiscal year 22-23 budget. We're doing it incrementally, and I believe that moving forward that'll be great for the folks that are in those positions that will be able to receive minimum of $15 an hour. We talked about it both from an executive team level, but also a departmental level. There was organizational changes, and again, I encourage everyone to look at the budget document because it will further explain a lot of things in detail. Because if I went through department by department and detail by detail, this presentation would probably be 9 hours long. So I'm trying to hit as much of the most important information as possible during this short period of time, and then hope that everyone will take a look at the document and kind of dig through it and analyze it, and then come back with any questions they have after that. So the $750 for the capital fund for the construction of the new court building was $750. We realigned the funding for some of the positions. I talked about that several times and several times for a reason. If you work in this department, you're being charged to this department. The days of you work in this department, but you're in this budget over here, so your department's budget is not very high because you're being charged elsewhere. Those days have come and gone. If you work in this department, you're being charged there, and that's across the board. And that's one thing that Mr. Miller hammered home very early and often when we first started this process. So that's one thing that we're proudly able to say. And each department's budget consists of the following. I didn't speak about this a lot, but again, I encourage everyone to look at the budget document. Each department has, in years past, including the current budget we're in, there's always a personnel summary for each department. This year we added to it. Not only do we have the personnel summary of, we have this many positions, these are the titles, we've also aligned the funding for the budgeted salaries for those positions as well, to that way, if you look at those numbers and you add those numbers up, they will match from your full-time and part-time salary lines within the budget. Those numbers will align. I didn't really harp on it a lot during this presentation. I have done them in subsequent presentations to council. But going back to our strategic plan, that's the foundation of what we're doing. Departments were required via us through Mr. Miller, thankfully allowing us to move forward with this. They were tasked with creating departmental goals for fiscal year 21-22. We wanted to be able to show the public, the council, the administration, and heck, even the other departments within the city, what each department actually does, who they do it for, why they do it, and what are they trying to achieve for this upcoming fiscal year. So that way it gives a buy-in and a level of accountability amongst the departments themselves to ensure that come June 30th of next fiscal year, they can look back and say, well, we actually did accomplish this goal, or we didn't. And if we didn't, then what can we do moving forward to ensure that we do? Departmental performance measures. Having goals without having measures is kind of foolish. So we wanted to ensure that we had performance measures in place to kind of track and measure the efficiencies and the effectiveness of each department. And the departments were tasked with pulling that information together. We were thankfully able to help a lot of them do that, but for the most part, those came from the departments themselves. And progressive funding for government operations returning to normalcy. We know that we are on what appears to be the tail end of the pandemic. We know that we will be returning to normalcy. We did not want to assume that normalcy would begin July 1, where everything is full bore the way it was before. So we're trying to strategically, progressively move towards full operations moving forward, and that is captured in the budget. 2% reduction in overall healthcare cost. Again, I talked about that earlier, but we're looking into this next coming fiscal year to solicit those services and hopefully reduce them more moving forward. We have level funding for the schools. And then we did our $500,000 for fund balance and $500,000 for our CIP according to our financial policies. So this is my arbitrary thank you slide, but I don't want it to come across as it's not genuine. I genuinely do appreciate City Council for their support and their guidance throughout this process. I definitely appreciate and thank the interim city manager for the guidance, leadership, and support throughout this process. Definitely was not an easy task. And he joked about it, but it's true. I didn't have this much gray hair when we started this, and I had a little bit more hair on the back of my head, but it's gone throughout this process. So we appreciate you and you leading us in the right direction to ensure that we got this budget put together the right way. The budget team, Mr. Williams, Ms. Tollison, and Ms. Mann, we couldn't have done it without them. Ms. Logan and Ms. Alicia, they were the ones that were the architect behind the presentation of the document itself. If you look at the document compared to what we've done in the past, including the current one, the document has a different look and feel about it. And I think that's important. One thing we wanted to do, and I apologize for rambling on, but I think it's worth noting that far too often in our job as it relates to the budget, we focus more on the numbers. The numbers, though they are important, they're not the whole story. I think the context that we've added within the document with our goals and our objectives, our narratives, some of the background information, starting at the very beginning of the document to the end, it kind of puts a little bow around those numbers. The numbers themselves are what they are, but I think the story behind it puts more context as to why the numbers are what they are, and I think that's extremely important. And then last but not least, we thank all the other departments in the city. They were definitely our partners throughout this, and it was not an easy process, but it was a process nevertheless. So we thank them for their cooperation and understanding during this process, because it was not an easy task, but it was a task nevertheless. So unless Mr. Miller has anything else, I want to guess we can open it up to the question and answer. Randall, do we have any questions about, is that what you brought me here? Okay, so these are questions that looks like we're asking chat that weren't addressed, right? Randall?
That's correct.
Okay, so Mr. Miller, the first one that was asked in the chat that we didn't answer, are there conversations and proactive planning as it relates to the likely closure of Riverside Regional Jail and how that may shift fiscal needs and investments into either our jail or another facility we can utilize?
Well, our jail is not open, and I don't see opening back up. That's talk that's going around the Commonwealth with respect to other houses of detention, jails, confinement houses. I think the board at the jail, and it's a regional concept, other than Chesterfield, no one else in the region has their own jail. So that board at the jail is working very feverishly with their current superintendent to meet the challenges that were levied down or imposed or spoken about from the folks in the jail, the board of, I guess, the custodial board with respect to the oversight for the jail. So it's a conversation. We have folks on the board, and Sheriff Crawford is on the board, a member of the Petersburg city staff is on the board, and they're going to keep us posted on that. But Sheriff Crawford has done a great job on the front end, speaking to the challenges that were presented to us. We knew about this about maybe 3 weeks ago, and she was well on her way to getting her staff and board members together to combat this. So I don't have much more than that right now. But the plan is to get the jail in compliance.
Okay, the next one, sir, is, and we kind of partially answered this one in chat. Mr. Williams wanted to still bring it up and see if we wanted to add more to it. The proposed revenue for utilities is reduced by 1.6 million. Why and what is the current collection rate? Do you want to speak to that?
Rob, you should, we don't have Stacy on here to talk about the collection rate, but can you give them an accurate response with respect to why the 1.6 reduction in utility? Just pick up from where you left off, please.
Yes, sir. Okay, so we kind of briefly talked about the collection rates being lower. Currently, as we're working through this process and we're monitoring these revenues on a monthly basis, we also annually work with our financial advisors on a utility rate study. We do it annually. They always take a look at it. And as we're working through the process this year, we were lockstep with them in agreement with everything that we're doing. And we're looking at the revenue streams that are coming in, and we see the revenue that's come in this current fiscal year, and we're extremely conservative on these numbers. So that's why it's reduced with the anticipation that the collection rates will increase. Currently, we're working on about 64 to 68% collection rate. And I think we kind of talked about this at one of the council meetings, that the vast majority of the issue is within our commercial revenue. It's not
Yes.
our residential and our industrial. I believe our residential's at about 78 to 79% collection rate. And I think I made this statement at the council meeting that if you'd have told us going into the pandemic that our collection rate for our residential would be 78 or 79%, no one would have believed that. We would have thought it was much lower. So due to the revenue at that level coming in at that rate, we are budgeting lower accordingly, with the anticipation of tracking it on a monthly basis like we do. We've streamlined that process behind the scenes with myself, my office, Miss Stacy Jordan, as well as Miss Ennis and Mr. Garrett and IT, to help get us training on some of us that don't deal with it in the day-to-day like others, to get some training on the way to pull some reports and pull the data live. And we're actually in full agreement on, what day of the month we pull the information to ensure we get it accurately in a consistent basis. And so we will be doing that as we move forward. We're not going to stop that. And in fact, we want to pull this data so often that we get it to where we can build up the foundational basically database of this information going back. We've started all the way from 2017, a month by month breakdown, and we want to keep that going moving forward to show some cyclical and seasonal and historical information moving forward. So that's a long way of saying that it's about 64 to 68% collection rate currently. So we do monitor that on a monthly basis, and we'll make adjustments accordingly. And I know that Miss Jordan in our finance office, who's over collections, is actually diligently working on ways to improve that collection rate and try to get that revenue that's desperately needed. I hope that answered whoever's question that was. And that looks like all of the questions. So
Do we have any questions from anybody that's watching this forum now?
I have one. There's one hand raised. You want to go ahead and it's Mr. Patrick Ingram.
Yes, Mr. Ingram.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good evening, Patrick Ingram. I'm at 836 South Gilfield Drive, and I really appreciate y'all providing this brief for the community. I have a lot of questions, but I'll keep it brief and I'll wait back in the queue just in case others have questions. But I did want to provide commentary in regards to my appreciation for the focus on the equitable distribution of salaries. I really do appreciate the focus on a climb to $15 per hour for city employees. I do think that currently there is too much money at the top while we have programmatic and departmental needs that are not being met, but also Mr. Floyd mentioned that there are also key considerations that require focus. So I do really appreciate the breakdown. And I had a couple questions, but I'll start with my main one. As it relates, I've been reviewing this budget proposal in its entirety, and I noticed a lot of departments had a focus on performance measures, but then also performance metrics. As it relates to the City Council and City Clerk's office, I noted that under performance, it seems to be more in line with the clerk's office only. And so what performance metrics are being used to ensure that the fiscal year 2021 and 2022 goals are being met?
Well, Robert, you have that one? You want me to take it?
That's specifically about the city council, correct, Mr. Ingram? I think you unmuted.
I'm muted, so you can answer.
Yes, sir, that's correct. Right now, as my review, I don't know when we can expect those metrics to be implemented in the proposed budget.
Gotcha. Mr. Ingram actually reached out to me with that question previously, and Those did come from the clerk, and I know that I was working with Mr. Miller, and I'll let you speak. I know that that was one thing that we were going to address moving forward is these measures are from the clerk. So we need to work with council and work with them on what performance measures they would like to do. But I can, if you want to speak on that, sir.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It'd be prudent to have the clerk get that information for us, and that we could bring back to Mr. Ingram and everyone else on this forum a well-informed answer instead of some answer just out of the sky. Because we really don't have an answer for him right now. Mr. Ingram, since you were on, and we really can't answer that one because we don't have a true answer for you, can you give us another question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just feel like we didn't give you your just due there, so please forgive us.
I've been waiting for this moment. So I noticed that there was a 15.82% change within fines and forfeitures. I don't remember what the amendment was or what kind of fiscal year that was sitting under, but is the city I've been noticing that the city's had a huge focus on blight. Within my own neighborhood, I've seen a couple of properties that have been staked that have been sitting around dilapidated for a while. So are you forecasting additional funds that will be placed into those, it would place within that that kind of subsection of fines and forfeitures that can support amendment changes, such as additional funding for parks and recreation and possibly for areas of need in our community, such as homeless shelters?
I won't speak to the particulars of that last part of the question, but as it relates to the fines and forfeitures revenue, it's a two-pronged approach as to why those numbers are projected higher. We know that, as you had stated, as we're developing the revenues, or as we're developing the budget, a lot of folks think we only focus on the expenditures with the departments, but we also focus on the revenues with the departments as it relates to those departments that actually touch revenue or generate revenue in some sort. So with working with our neighborhood services department, along with our clerk of circuit court, Ms. Parham, we saw that the trend was moving in the upward trajectory as it relates to those fines and forfeitures. Specifically within neighborhood services, based on when they've started implementing their new policies and procedures. So we've seen an uptick in that. The reason why the numbers were so low in the amendment is because a lot of the court's activities were not taking place as often during the pandemic, if at all, at certain times. So working with the clerk during the budget process, both from an expenditure but also a revenue standpoint, she basically said that the courts are ramping up to start opening back up normally. And what that means is normally for us is actually more because they're backlogged. So we're going to see an extremely large amount of backlog cases and things like that coming before the courts that will result in those revenues going up. So that is one of those revenue streams that, though it did go up in the proposed budget, it's one that we're going to keep a close eye on to see how far it goes up above what we budgeted. Again, myself and Mr. Miller and Mr. Williams and all of us on this team, we definitely budget on the conservative side. So we feel like those numbers will be, there's Ms. Parham if she wants to chime in.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, so the pandemic created a halt when it came to jury trials in the courts. So we just resumed jury trials 2 months ago. We went from none at all to now about 3 each week. So we will see an increase in fines and cost because we were at a complete halt when it came to jury trials.
Thank you, ma'am. So, Mr. Ingram, hopefully that answered your question. I think that was an all-encompassing answer, I believe.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
No problem. Are there any other questions?
If you have a question, please raise your hand in this.
There you go. Thank you, Garrett.
Mr. Ingram.
Thank you so much. This is my last question. This is it. So I did have one more question. I know that based off of the presentation,
You muted again.
I'm sorry about that. So I saw that our budget based off the presentation, that we are just completely balanced. But due to the streets fund seeing a decrease, will we be able to still have the city, will it still be able to have the ability to respond during inclement weather, and more importantly, longer term solutions as it relates to road repairs that aren't necessarily in the capital improvement plan, rather than just having patch jobs? There's a lot of roads within Ward 6 and 5, that are typically the community's perception is that these areas are given less attention to, right? So like I'm curious to know, will we be able to have room in the budget to ensure areas that have had less focus to be able to have, street repair and focus as the needs arrive?
Mr. Williams, you want to handle that one from the CIP standpoint?
I'll take that. Okay, so,
Page 194, budget document.
okay, so on the budget document, page for the day-to-day operational activities of street operations are not going to be impacted, such as those examples that you gave. So inclement weather won't be a problem. There was money there for removal this year. It was there, but we didn't need it. On the capital side, this fiscal year and last fiscal year, we actually budgeted $1 million for street paving. And so there has been about, I want to say over the last 2 fiscal years, maybe about $1.7, $1.8 million for street paving. So, we've got other additional projects. We've got the St. Andrew Street Bridge that's supposed to be completed in an estimated time frame of October, November time frame. So we've got the funding to do capital projects, some of those that I just described, some of those that we hadn't done in the past, and we've got the funding for operations, inclement weather, or just day-to-day operations. And we've also gotten some over the last 2 to 3 fiscal years that's helping us out with the day-to-day operational activities.
All right, and Mr. Miller, we also have Ms. Ennis here from an
Yes.
operational standpoint.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
I'm
yes,
just going to talk about the capital side first.
yes, Mr. Ingram, in regards to our street operations, we will continue performing as normal as it relates to snow response and things like that. Over the next fiscal years.
Hi, baby.
Oh, sorry, ma'am. Okay, got it. Okay, over the next fiscal year, we will be planning more towards a capital plan, allocating more funds towards street operations and paving operations throughout the city. As in the past, what we tried to do is accomplish paving in different areas of the city as opposed to being focused in one area. So what y'all will see during the next fiscal year is a more thought out plan as it relates to what streets that are concerns by the citizens, as well as the city council and other employees. We are working with BDOT to do another road assessment throughout the city so that we could prioritize which streets needs to be paved over the next few fiscal years. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Ennis. Got a hand raised.
Ms. Rudolph?
Hey, sorry about that. I didn't mean to blurt out in the middle of what Miss Ennis was saying. I didn't anyway, and I apologize because I had to miss quite a bit of this session. I know it was really good, but I had something going on some repairs going on at my house that I couldn't take my attention away from totally. But I wanted to ask about the library and the library addition that's been being constructed. I believe that the city has put $250,000 toward that, but the last time there was a presentation about it at council, the Library Foundation said that they needed another, I think, $800,000 after the shell of the building was complete. in order to finish the inside of the building. So I wanted to know in terms of the budget, both the 22 budget and any other, the current year budget, what's planned? Is the city planning to spend any money on that, on the library addition? I realized that there was $500,000 unallocated in a capital improvement plan, and I didn't know if that maybe had a an unwritten earmark for the library or anything else.
Robert,
To my knowledge, it may, Ms. Bill, I don't know if you want to handle this. To my knowledge, we're not anticipating spending any additional funding than the 250 that we've already spent, as well as the 50,000 within the CDBG budget
yes.
this year, which totals 300,000. To my knowledge, that's the only amount that we've committed to the library foundation themselves. I know we did not incorporate any of that funding in the current budget for that new building or the construction of it in the current proposed budget, the way it is now.
That's
Okay,
correct.
okay, that's good. So there was also from, I think in the CARES Act funding from, that's ongoing. There was originally 100,000 put in for that, but that got taken back out. Is that true, Mr.
Correct.
Floyd?
Yes, ma'am. It was
Yes.
originally, it was part of the $250,000. And it's easy explanation is CARES just happened to be at that time the funding source in which was utilized to pay the $100,000. But upon further review, that was not a good idea. So that money was moved out
Okay.
of the CARES funding into the general fund, and it hit the general fund as opposed to the CARES funding.
Okay, good, thank you. There's also was, there was also money spent on some kind of, some kind of I don't know if it was a system to be used in the meeting place or something that was, I think it's called Snag It. I don't know.
It's Swag It, and yes, ma'am, that has
Swag It.
been purchased using the CARES funding, and to my knowledge, unless something has changed, Mr. Miller, that's going to be put into the new building for the utilization of the city council meetings there. But that was purchased for whether it was going to be used in the library or the train station. It was purchased for the purpose of not televising, but live streaming the meetings. It just so happens that the meetings, I believe, will probably go towards that area. So it's more coincidence as opposed to the funding going towards the library. It's going,
Yeah.
yeah. But
No, I mean, I think
Swag It.
yeah, it's, thank you. It's fine. I just, because I don't think that the library, unless there's something going on inside the library that, obviously we don't see it, but unless something is going on, I don't think the target date of it being ready for council to use in June appears to be, a likelihood. So I'd just like to, it would be nice that for the city to use the technology that it spent money on, regardless of where we meet, because I don't think when we go back to live meetings, it's going to be going immediately to the library, but I don't know that. I'm speculating. So.
Would you like me to field that question?
Yes, please.
The Swagit is a system that does live streaming online, and it's also the only system we ever had that can actually stream on the public access channel through TV. And we didn't deploy it because we were going to originally deploy it at the train station where we used to have meetings, and then things changed and COVID came about. So now we're holding it until we get the new meeting space in the library set up.
I understand. That's what the former city manager said months ago. We've been hearing that for months, but I guess my other question, which I realize is really far afield from the 2022 budget, but when is the library space going to be available for the city council to use?
I don't have an answer for that one because it's still under construction.
Right. So we're talking about, it seems like it would be months, not just, if we're talking about a month, half a year or a year, that's a long time to leave some technology on the shelf that could make the workings of city government more accessible to citizens, which is, what all of us citizens are about it. And I hope that most of the people in city government are also working in the same direction.
So was that it, Ms. Rudolph? Was that
Yes,
all the
sir.
questions? Yes, ma'am. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to Mr. Ingram. Oh, his hand went down.
Oh, I'm here. I know back in 2017, of February of 2017, Petersburg invested in a software called OpenGov to work to create more transparency as it relates to the management of money. I have not seen or heard much else of it since I moved here about 3 years ago. Is there any plan on leveraging some of our money, some of our funds to bring it back, or some other type of software that we can leverage to have more accessibility to being able to see the budget as it is being funds are being appropriated and things are happening in a more live capacity, a more real-time capacity?
That's a twofold question. First question as it relates to OpenGov, that was purchased prior to my arrival of being here and working for the first 6 months, trying to utilize that software. It was determined by myself and the finance team, as well as Mr. Van Voorhees and our IT department, that the OpenGov platform was not something that was beneficial to the city of Petersburg. The way we were constructed at that time from an infrastructure standpoint internally, via electronically, I mean, our IT infrastructure as well as our staffing infrastructure at the time in 2017, we were essentially wasting $30-something thousand a year, and we promptly canceled that contract. But I will say this, we're in the middle of working on developing an RFP to put out on the streets for a new ERP system that if all goes well, and Mr. Van Voorhees might want to speak to this, if we're able to move forward with this ERP and then procure that and get that up and running, there will be we would be looking at capabilities of an ERP to do more of that transparency piece that would basically format and then go towards the website. That's something that can be done. I know from a budget standpoint, our office is actually working currently as we speak right now. Ms. Logan, I almost guarantee, sitting at her desk now right now working on it. We're working on a dashboard that we are going to synchronize and put it on our budget and procurement webpage. I can't say when it's going to be done because we're in the middle of doing it, but it's going to include a lot of our performance measures, our goals and objectives. A lot of the things that are appearing in the budget document itself will show up in live, so to speak. So month to month, as those numbers come in, we have those goals and objectives. We have those performance measures that are time bound, rather than waiting till the end of the fiscal year to show, hey, by the way, at the end of the fiscal year, this is where you're at. We're developing a dashboard where the departments, we're working together with them to each month they go in and input the information that the measure is that it goes towards. And so that way that each month that information will update, so that way at any given time, anyone can go out there and see, I see performance measures here in the budget and procurement office. Where are y'all at year to date on that as far as y'all's target goal? That's what we're working on, and that will be implemented at the beginning of the fiscal year, and that'll go live. But even further than that, we're looking at working with IT to ensure that the month-to-month budget to actual reports that we do present to council, we're able to also put that on that same dashboard to show, hey, we're in August. Guess what? The budget was this amount. We've only spent this amount, right? And then we track it throughout the year, and it'll show month to month. It'll be a month to month drop of the information rather than doing it weekly, because month to month for me is much easier and it's much more consistent due to the if we don't close a day at a given time, right, that revenue and that expenditure is not going to show up. But if we do it monthly on the same date, then it's consistently dropping that information in there like that. So that's something that we're actually in the middle of working on and developing as we speak.
Ms. Rudolph's hands raised.
Thank you. Okay. God, now I'm sorry, I just got a message that distracted me. I'm going to put my hand down and raise it again. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, Robert, after Ms. Rudolph asks her question, I think what we can do is just give out your phone number
Oh, absolutely.
in the chat. That way our community partners can email you and get information, because I'm sure someone here has a question that they may not want to ask now. While we do have for her to get her question back, I want to thank Sheriff Crawford really for the work that she's done with JL1 and to her work with the seniors. Today, she had a senior kickoff. She allowed me to come out there and say hi to her seniors. It was really a great event. So Chef Crawford, thank you for everything that you do for our community and for our seniors. And it's not a misnomer that you got the award that you received. It was well earned. So thank you so much. Ms. Rudolph's hands raised again. There we go. Now we're ready. Come on, Barb.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I think I got it together. I wanted to ask a question about the whole pharmaceutical manufacturing thing, efforts that are going on, which of course are wonderful and really helpful to the city. I didn't know if there was anything, and I apologize because I've been in and out of this presentation so much, so I may have missed something, but what are we doing in terms of staffing or extra emphasis on working with those pharmaceutical manufacturers, the state, the various other educational entities and nonprofits and so forth that are involved with, bringing a good workforce to these pharmaceutical plants? I know we have an economic development department, but we're down a few people, and I didn't know if there was anybody dedicated to being a project manager on the pharmaceutical manufacturing efforts. That's my question. Is there anything in the budget or else otherwise being done that will provide a high level of attention and assistance to that effort, so we don't get left out of anything that we have the potential to work on?
Well, thanks. That's a great question. Jeremy Tennant, he brings a wealth of knowledge to this. And he's been on even before I got here, he was working with the flow piece, and he's been working with our political partners, and he's been on the front end of any grants with respect to that whole corridor there of the pharmaceutical piece that's in our city now. So Jeremy, and he has a few fellows that are working with him as well. And I've been very impressed with our fellows that we have. We have 3 assigned to us, and all 3, oh my gosh, these are young people who are well educated, well versed, and they're partnering with Jeremy and doing some work, whether it be with our FOIA piece, whether it be with our finance piece, budgeting piece, and in the economic development department, while we pursue the position of economic development director. So I think Mr. Tennant has a real good handle on things, particularly from a legislative perspective. And I'm just saying, from the guy on the outside looking in, the guy who's blessed with having this job, from on an interim perspective, Petersburg's been doing some pretty good things, and I'm really impressed. So, Mr. Floyd, you've got to interject something, please, if you would.
I just wanted to add to what you were saying, sir, as it relates, and then also address one of the secondary supplemental questions that Ms. Rudolph spoke about as it relates to a lot of the education. And if you go back to our strategic plan, there's quite a bit in the first part of it within our economic development goal that speaks to a lot of the education as it relates to some of the partnerships that we're going to be developing, a lot of the programs that are going to be put together. And I wanted to bring that up because I feel like that, I don't want to speak out of turn, Mr. Miller, so if I do, just shut me down. But I think that on the upcoming soon to be, I would imagine, city manager, whoever he or she may be, I believe that the implementation of the strategic plan and the providing the foundation for what that looks like and then actually implementing it, I think that's key. And I think a lot of those issues that you address on the tail end of your question, I think those will be addressed as we start to implement the strategic plan as it's adopted, because it does address a lot, if not all of those points that you had made towards the end. I think Mr. Miller addressed the other part, but I think once we get the ball rolling on the implementation of the strategic plan under the guidance of the upcoming the new city manager, whoever he or she may be, I think that will address a lot of those questions that you had, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say, from everything I've seen that Mr. Tennant has done, I'm very impressed with. So I think I agree with Mr. Miller that he's a huge asset to the city. I'm just concerned about what other responsibilities that he may have. I mean, it's more of I think we do have some great people, but I hope that they're not being pulled in too many different directions, that when this is really like a full-time job. That's where I'm coming from. I think you've got great people, but you know, we lost another person on the team who was also really a good person and instrumental to this. That was India Adams Jacobs. So, you know, we got to have bench strength. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say thanks to all the folks that came out tonight. But I got Miss Scott. Thank you, Miss Scott. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Thank you, Miss Ennis. Chief Liebald, thank you so much. Miss Hardy is there. Miss Sinclair, thank you so much for coming out tonight. These are all city employees that are Miss Yerby, that are, and Jeremy, you're on here. Miss Mann, thank you so much. Miss Wade, for all coming out. And I know I'm gonna miss somebody. I'm gonna probably get in trouble, but please forgive me. It's not on purpose. And thanks to all of our community partners. Ms. Rue, you and I had a great conversation today, so thank you again for coming back out, and to everybody for coming back out and just being a part of the budget presentation. This transparency piece and being forthright and showing you that we care and that we do listen. When you told me coming back that we were top heavy, Patrick Ingram would have gotten, he would have blasted me because he and I had a conversation. We talked about that and he was right. And I want to say thank you. And Ms. Rudolph, thank you for bringing these things to us. We can't be top heavy if we're going to be successful. We need more people who are actually boots on the ground because our city is about ready to really explode with success. So we listen to you, we hear you. It's not our budget, it's our budget. Ours from a holistic standpoint, all of us. And I got to tell you, our constitutional officers have been fantastic. Sheriff Crawford came into the budget meeting and she was ready to go, and she was just, it was refreshing. So on behalf of our city, thank you so much. And Ms. Pam, thank you for jumping in and helping us out with that question. Mr. Floyd, anything that I might have forgotten? I know I forgot somebody. I'm gonna get in trouble, but I apologize. It's not on purpose.
I can't even see who all's in the chat, but I don't know who all's here. But I mean, I echo everything you said. I appreciate everything and I appreciate the support from you, staff, both internally within the budget office, but externally as well, because I said it again, I'll say it one more time. There could be a potential of 3 different administrations in place during the start to the implementation of this budget. And I can't stress the amount of stress that we've got from a budget side to try to get this done and get it done right. And all credit goes to the folks that are involved. Otherwise, I don't think we would have got there. So I don't have anything else, sir. If that's it, we can call it an evening, correct?
Thank you so much. And Mr. Floyd's put his number in the chat, 804-733-2344. If for some reason you can't get a hold of him, my number is 804-586-3411, 804-586-3411. Give me a shout. Don't mind talking. And I don't always have every answer, but I got most of them. God bless you all. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.